Hi, everyone. I am joined today by my friend. I hope I can call him friend. I think I can. Will Keller of naturalfreedomleague.com and also a co-creator of and on the One Great Work Network. Will was a featured presenter and I would imagine a lead or likely lead organizer of the recent Freedom Under Natural Law conference, the F.U.N.L conference, which great title, great concept. I love the funnel concept of all of that and the toroid. And that was a 2-day conference, February 12th and 13th, discussing freedom in reality, freedom in nature, and how we actually go about achieving it. Will's presentation, entitled The State of Freedom, What It Is and What It Is Not, was very well done, if you ask me. And at the end of it, he sent out a challenge, or maybe an invitation at any rate. He challenged people to get involved and to reach out to him to engage in deeper discussion. And getting involved in educating people about the actions required to bring about freedom is what I'm all about. So I reached out. Will, thank goodness, would have been embarrassing if he hadn't kept up his end, of course. And he is here to discuss what freedom actually is and is not. First, Will, thank you so much for spending your time and attention here with me. And thank you so much for that great presentation. I'll obviously have it linked. If people haven't seen that, absolutely, even I would say stop this, go watch that and come back, or watch this and then go do that. Either way, watch them both.
Thanks,
So how
Andy.
are you?
I'm doing good, man. It's a pleasure to be here. It's good seeing you. I do consider you a friend, man, and a peer in the one great work of educating minds. So I appreciate that. The funnel conference was a great project. It was a group project, a support group that we had for a little over a year and a half, and everyone played their part. And I also contributed graphics and the live streaming production, which that was my first big endeavor, but it came out smooth and it got a great response. So huge success.
Awesome. Yeah, it was. I haven't watched all of it, but what I've seen, I was very impressed, and kudos to. I know how much it takes to put something like that together from all aspects, and it's when it comes across well, when it seems easy to people, you've been, that is the sign that you've done it right. Because I did theater for years. It's been a long time, but one of the things that you always say about theater is if you don't notice all the technical aspects, that means that they were done right. Because if you notice them, it means they're standing out and detracting. And I certainly, in the feedback that I've seen, it's been that it was really smooth and really went off. So just kudos. And it's not just you. There's a lot of people, which I think is encouraging to point out that, there are those of us that are in front of the camera. There are those of us that are, kind of the out in front of this a little bit, but it's not about the people that you see on camera. It's about everybody that it takes. So, just kudos to anybody who is involved in that
Yeah,
work.
man.
So I'm going to jump in. I've watched your presentation twice now, watched it right after it came out. I wasn't able to catch it during the live stream, but I think I watched it the Tuesday after, maybe. Anyway, and then I watched it just a couple of days ago to get refreshed in advance of talking to you. The first thing I thought that really kind of stood out to me was obviously the great depth and the frequency of definitions that you gave. The second thing, and the thing that really blew me away, was the idea that you shared regarding art and how it relates to the great work, which we'll save for kind of the second half of this discussion. But to get started, was clearly defining your terms something you knew you were going to do when you set out to craft the presentation, or did that kind of come as you started to build it?
No, it was definitely intentional. When I did my rough outline for the presentation, that was one of the things that was at the top of my list. I wanted to do this presentation. I wanted to simplify the profound. Freedom is something that, the majority of people think they know. And that's the problem. They think they know something, but they don't have a clear perception on what it actually is. So I wanted to make it simple, so people can digest, and defining words is extremely important. Obviously, definition itself means clarity of meaning. And one of my early slides, I even had the phrase in there, communication is important, but comprehension is key. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to define words and, lay out the whole presentation so someone can digest it very simply and have correct terminology. Because, when someone has, it's all about words. This is how, we communicate. It's like I'm doing a presentation, so the communication is the giving. I'm giving communication. The takeaway is in hope someone can comprehend the message. So starting very basic, the fundamental principles, which would be words. And so, yeah, it was intentional. And I mean, I had a list of words that I wanted to define even more, but I thought that would be, a little too much. So,
Well, they're not always, but I feel that
yeah.
there could be, I don't know, it's kind of off the top of my head too, but there almost should be maybe a Wikipedia almost. I don't want to make it too open, but for these concepts, because I feel like something that, and maybe Wikipedia is partially responsible, but some of these concepts that are profound are so made to be so obtuse that, people hear a word like freedom, and, this goes back to general semantics, and Korzybski and Wittgenstein talked about it a lot, but everybody thinks that when I say freedom and you hear freedom, that the concept in your head for freedom and the concept that in my head for freedom are the same thing because we have the same word. But the associations that people have for those words are sometimes radically disparate. And so to really go out and say, all right, within the context of this conversation, these are the definitions, I think is really important. And, maybe it could be something that, I don't know, it's again off the top of my head, that, really defining the terms for the discussion on a grander level is something that, is important. And then of course, doing it for an individual discussion is of really great import, so that people, at least for the duration of a presentation, know, all right, this is the concept that he's talking about when he's using the word or she's using the word, or this organ, so
Oh,
I thought
yeah.
that was really good.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, words alone, if you look at the etymology and the root of words, I mean, it's just mind-blowing what you can discover and learn just through words alone. And even words that people use on a day-to-day basis and they might not have a correct definition of that. Words carry vibration and energy. So it's important that we choose our words wisely, but also know what the association is when we're using these words. Unfortunately, the English language is almost a bastardized, language. There's a lot of issues with it. So getting down to the root of where that word originates is extremely important.
Yeah. And etymology is such an interesting way to look at kind of how a word has, maybe what it initially stood for, and then to see where we've come, and where that word has taken us, or how we use it now in the common vernacular. Oftentimes is like, wow, how did we get here? And you learn a little bit about the history of the way that people change, or the culture, quote unquote, has changed.
Just like freedom.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
like the word freedom. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So my favorite, speaking of definitions, I think my favorite definition of the many that you gave was natural. I don't think I'd ever heard the word natural defined quite this way. And I don't think I'd ever really thought about defining nature in or natural in quite a specific term, or to put a nice point on it like you did. But I'm going to, here it was: natural, inherent, having basis in nature, reality, and truth of or related to creation. And I just thought, yeah, I mean, it's inherent, really. The inherent, tying the word inherent to natural was really, kind of like, yes, that's really what we're talking about. Because and you've probably run into this quite a bit as well. You talk about natural, and particularly in the context of natural law to people, and they think of that Darwinian law of the jungle, survival of the fittest, or they think of, the world of nature and trees, and it's something that, yeah, that's an aspect of what we talk about when we talk about nature. But really, when we're talking about natural, we're talking about inherent, and I really think that's a good word for it. So
Yeah.
I really appreciated being able to think about it in terms of inherent and reality, and nature reality, same kind of thing, same, two different words for the same thing. Now, are there any particular definitions that you thought were vital for a deeper understanding of freedom overall and specifically to your presentation?
Yeah, and I'll start with natural. This is a huge word for someone to kind of to integrate into their understanding, because we're not separate from nature. We are part of nature, and to discern the natural from the artificial is extremely important, even in our own psyche, with what we know and what we believe. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So, having a basis of what is inherent, and but going deeper than that and actually discovering the laws of nature is vital, right? This is how we can apply this understanding to almost anything we do. To see, I mean, food, for instance, right? You have artificial food and natural foods of the earth. It's inherent. It comes, the process is inherent from creation. And so this is really important, that nature and natural, and nature used to be pronunciated as netcher. It stood for NTR, right? This goes back to Egyptian. And so, of and relating to God or creation, I put creation, even though if you look in like a Latin or Greek dictionary, you're going to get God on there. But still, God, creation. But still, God's another one that, people can discuss, because with monotheism, everyone goes to, Christian or some kind of cultural religion. So I'm an animist. I look at everything as consciousness. That's the inherent foundation in the natural world. So my operating system on how I discern if something is true or deceptive, I bring it back down to the natural, and if it jibes with that aspect. So yeah, natural is a good one. And of course, we're talking about freedom in my presentation. So, I like to start with the foundation. So if we're talking about freedom, what is freedom? That's why I gave the definition, right? Free will expression, unrestricted or unrestrained free will expression. And, from there you can go, okay, so we exist, human beings, we exist in this reality. What's the main principle that we exist under? Our actions, right? We all take behaviors and actions. So what action is right behavior and wrong behavior? And this is where you get into rights. Here's another word that I think a lot of people have a misdefinition of. Obviously, we can look at what's going on in the world, and most people think rights are a social construct, or they come from government, or they come from the Constitution, right? Oh, the Constitution grants us our rights, they secure our rights. When in reality, you have rights. It's inherent to creation, to nature, because you exist, right? So and so learning that word gives us the preface of right and wrong behavior. So, and then, and like I said in my presentation, it's like you take these words or even the message, and you have to apply it to yourself first, and then apply it to the world, which I think is really important. So you take rights, for example, and, do I have a right to do a certain action? And if you don't, then that applies to the world, right? No one's different. We're all equal in our rights. I know you know this information. I'm just kind of diving in deep for the viewers and listeners and stuff. So, what is a right? A right is any action or behavior that does not initiate or cause harm. So that, lays the foundation, goes hand in hand with freedom. Because if we're talking about free will expression, which are the actions and the behaviors that you take in existence in your life, right? What is right and what is wrong? And so we can apply that to ourselves. I can't harm any being, any sentient being. I can't harm Andy. Andy can't harm me. But this applies to everyone else. So we apply it to the world, and we get to, government, which here's another good definition of government, gubernare mens mentes, which means mind control. So, and that's just the definition, the etymology of that word. We can dive in deeper on the actual understanding of what it is, because it's not an entity, it's just a belief system. So a few other words, we're talking about freedom. Well, what's the opposite of freedom? Slavery. And slavery is pretty much it's a claim of ownership. As soon as someone restricts your free will, they're making that claim saying, oh, you can't do that action or behavior. That's a claim onto you, onto your persons, onto your body, or the fruits of your labor, which is an extension of your energy, yourself, your body. So just breaking down words, it's amazing. It almost lays out the message if you do the progression in order. What is a right? Where does the rights come from? What is a right? Slavery is good. I used thraldom, which is a word you don't hear much in the
I had never heard
presentation.
it. I had never heard it before, so that was a great. I love new words.
Oh yeah, no, it's great. Almost a more defining word of slavery. It's pretty much living in the condition of duress and servitude. There's masters and slaves. This is what thraldom is, the state of. Another one that goes good with thraldom that actually I don't think I use, but it's serfdom. Serfdom just simply means you are your slave. You are a servant. It's the state of servitude. So all of these words apply, right? We can apply them to ourselves, but then look at the natural world and see what's going on in reality, and that will lead to following orders, police, military, doctors, nurses, and all this kind of stuff that I dove into later on in the presentation. So yeah, I mean, those are solid words to start with, the basics, which are important, because if you don't have a foundation, then everything that you're going to build upon that is just it's going to crumble down. This is what principles are, principia, right? First things first. So that's why it's good. I'm actually working on a project called what does it mean to be human? And it's going to go really well with freedom, but it's talking about the principles of being human, right? These are objective in nature. Objective, subjective, relative. These are all terms too that are good definitions as well that people should really look into. We're talking about freedom and rights, of course. Morality. What is morality? That's another, huge word, right? The definitive difference between right and wrong behavior. So
Yeah.
it's good. It's good to look into words for sure. But see, the problem is that people think they know a word. Now, what makes this person take a step back and say, maybe I don't know this word? And that I'll save the answer for that later on when we get into the art.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, yeah, those are all great definitions. Thraldom is such a neat kind, it's one of those things. It's like, all right, I got to remind myself to incorporate that into my lexicon. And, you know, what a perfect timing when, for example, people are starting to get their slave money back from the slave masters at this time of year, when they put their piece of paper in the mail, and hopefully they get some of their slave labor that they've been forced out of back in the mail from the slave masters, and say, oh, did you get your thraldom receipt yet?
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
yearly thraldom return.
Yeah.
um
Spend it in serfdom.
yeah, and
The
good
state of
health, I guess.
servitude. Yeah. And
Yeah,
good health. Yeah, exactly.
serfdom and good health, if there's if those two are compatible at all, which they might not be. I mean, look around at nature. Does nature, is there health where there's serfdom? Probably not.
Yeah, exactly.
um
Exactly.
Now, anyway, this next might be a question that I know I could certainly discuss for an hour on its own. And of course, we can take as much time as you wish, but you mentioned in your presentation that you were generally against, or at least reticent of, belief. So my question is, what is it that you find so dangerous about belief?
Yeah. Yeah. Beliefs are, extremely powerful and dangerous, right? Because what is a belief? Well, there's lie right in the word for belief. right? It's in the word, and opposed to knowledge, which you have know in the word knowledge. So a belief is simply it's an axiom that is considered to be self-evident. But with beliefs, the scientific method isn't applied to that. It's not based in facts, logic, and reason, right? Usually, the majority of beliefs are passed down, so they're given to us, right? Like generational, just thought forms that our parents or government schooling has given, or culture, which is one of the biggest ones, right? So we've picked up these belief systems, these axioms, and then they get ingrained within us. We think they're true, we think they're self-evident, which makes it's a false axiom because it's not based in facts, logic, and reason. But the problem with that is we take our actions based on the knowledge or the information that we hold. So even belief is just information. So whatever information we hold in our psyche, that's going to dictate the actions that we take. So this is where it gets dangerous. And I don't have a problem with someone that, like I said, I'm totally against belief in general. And and I've gotten a lot of slack for this by saying this, which I don't have a problem with it, and I stand by it because I don't have a problem with saying I don't know. So when you know something, it's verifiable. It's based in logic and reason. So you can come to know it. That's the first thing that we have to kind of talk about, is that you can know things. Truth is discoverable. You can definitively know certain aspects of life and reality. But the problem with beliefs are it gets ingrained in the subconscious. So it gets hardwired deep in our subconscious and it becomes habit. Now it's in your subconscious and most people don't even think about it, right? It's just automatic. And for instance, just thinking that, government is moral, or voting, all these belief systems that have no basis in the natural world. These are artificial, meaning they're man-made, they're mental constructs that we have made up. It's make believe, right? So it's kind of living in a fantasy, but to a person that holds these beliefs, it's considered self-evident, and then that dictates their actions. That's how it gets dangerous. For someone to snap out of those beliefs, usually there has to be an event, right? There has to be like, what's the best teacher? The best teacher is suffering, right? If you believe that you can walk on water, right, and that's like whimsical, that's way out there, right? We know we can't walk on water, right, because we can use the scientific method and experiment ourselves. This is something we can know. But if you believe you can walk on water, you're going to know you can't when you try and you sink down and you drown, or you have to swim out, right? Then that will completely change that belief. It'll get eradicated from your psyche. So when we talk about these dangerous belief systems, like the belief in human authority over other humans, right? There might be suffering that has to happen, unfortunately. And hopefully it all depends on the work that we can do and how we can influence people for them to snap out of that ingrained habitual state of mind. So, and who knows what the degree of suffering will be for the aggregate of humanity, but it doesn't have to be through suffering, right? But most of the time there's a catalyst, and that catalyst is discomfort. Because when you're uncomfortable, it's just like if you sprained your ankle, right? You have to push on certain areas, and it's it's not comfortable. It's discomfort to find where the pain points are, to see if it's broke or out of place or whatever. Same thing with anything that we're trying to, with belief systems or anything we're trying to change within oneself. There's going to be discomfort. Unfortunately, in culture nowadays, fear is put up on a pedestal. It's almost as a false virtue. Respect my fear, right? It's like we're living in a culture of victimhood, and people are scared and fearful of discomfort. So, they're going to be face to face with the suffering at some point. And hopefully, we as influencers and educators, we can try to, um, you know, intervene as much as we can. It's always on the individual to make that transition. So, we looking at the world, we have some major belief systems that are a problem. Here's one, a category, and there's many, right? Like you said, you can do an hour alone. Cultural religions, right? Let's define the word religion. Religare means to bind or hold back. Now, yes, there's a positive connotation on religion. It means to like retie together, to reunite. But that in context of nature, creation, we look at the cultural religions, that's not part of the system, right? Because it's authoritarian within itself, right? You have to go to a priest, or you have to go to a bishop or a rabbi to commune with the creator, when this is completely false. This is a lie. This is a belief. So, we all have that ability to commune with creation. It's within ourselves and all around us in the natural world. So that's an example. The belief in human authority I mentioned earlier, which ultimately gives us government. So, and we see where this leads. I mean, just looking at a long view of history, we've had kingship, even pharaohs, kingship, working our way up. There's always been a ruling class in the history that we have available now. I don't think it's always been that way, but that's for another episode. But there's always been some type of ruling class, and this ruling class, they know this type of information, the information that I've dove into in my presentation. They hold it dear to them, and they keep it occulted, another word that we can define, which simply means hidden. Occultism, hidden knowledge. And they keep this information. It's the last thing they want, is the people to become educated on the objective laws and objective truth, to know certain information. Because what that means, that gives people empowerment, right? That pulls the veil from their psyche and lifts the curtain, and like in the Wizard of Oz. So we can do that on our own, and we have to. So they hold that information, and it creates a power differential because of an information differential. So belief is extremely important for the social engineers or the ruling class. They want to keep belief systems in place. They do that with culture, right? Culture means to cultivate. What is it cultivating? It's cultivating your psyche, your operating system, how you process and filter information, so that dictates your behavior. So it's a pretty dangerous road. So it's doing the internal work. That's where it starts. You look in the mirror and you ask yourself, well, what do I believe? And, for me, I'm anti-belief, because we can come to know things, and that's the kind of thinking that we need to kind of be in. And of course, there are things that we're not going to know, even due to lack of information, right? But there are things, the basic principles and foundations of existence and the human body, we can understand this.
Absolutely. So many places to start. Well, culture, speaking of definitions, and you brought up culture, but culture means to intentionally grow or develop another organism. I mean, that when you culture an organism, you're intentionally crafting the way its life's going to become. So I always think that's an interesting one to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Another one,
and cult is in there too, right?
And cult is in there too. Yeah. Another one that's interesting, and this is more of a green language definition, which isn't strictly speaking defining something, but I think it's called green language because it can help to color the way that you and shade the way that you perceive a word and the way that people are using it. Well, if you take belief and kind of separate it in half, you've got the lie or belief, and then the first part is Bill, the oldest god, the god of the ego, the oldest sun god in the known
Mm.
world. And so it's the life of the ego. It's the life of Bill, and that's a dangerous place to live, I think, for many reasons, most of which we've touched on already. And ultimately, the way that I understand it, the way that it seems to make sense to me at this point in my experience, is that when you believe something, you're accepting it as truth, and it's bypassing all critical thinking, and it's going right into having an effect on your emotions and actions without ever accessing the thought part of that process. And that's dangerous in and of itself, because it cuts out a whole part of what being human is about, which is thinking, not just feeling and acting, but thinking. And that's, to me, what differentiates a belief from a thought, is once you start thinking about a belief, it's no longer a belief, it's a thought now.
Mm.
Belief is something, it's this information that you blindly accept, as opposed to thinking about it. And once you think about it, you no longer believe it. And you can say, look, I think this might be the case, or that might be the case, but ultimately I don't know. If I don't know, if I ultimately don't know, I can also think, hey, I might get more information in the future that might change the way that I think about it. Versus belief tends to be, if the information doesn't immediately jibe with it, it just gets written off wholesale, because the critical thinking faculty, again, is being bypassed. So I'm totally in agreement. I think belief is dangerous. And if you'll permit me a moment, I don't know if you're uh, have read or familiar with Robert Anton Wilson,
Mm. Yeah.
but I came across something that, and it's kind of it's a paragraph long here, but and I certainly, if as people look into different thoughts and people's ideas and stuff, I think that there's some value in Robert Anton Wilson stuff. I think a lot of his stuff gets dangerously close to solipsism. We can't really know everything, so there's it takes a healthy dose, to me, a healthy dose of critical thinking, and not believing everything he says, but taking it in stride.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to put that caveat out there, because he's been of immense value to me. But I know personally other people who are big fans of Robert Anton Wilson, because they take the solipsist stuff completely and ignore a lot of the other stuff. But I came across this and I thought it was important, or synchronistic, I should put. So I wanted to just read this here into the records of this conversation really quick. I do not believe, this is from The Cosmic Trigger, Volume 1. I do not believe anything. This remark was made in these very words by John Gribben, physics editor of New Scientist magazine, in a BBC TV debate with Malcolm Muggeridge, and it provoked incredulity on the part of most of its viewers. It seems to be a hangover of the medieval Catholic era that causes most people, even the educated, to think that everybody must believe something or other, that if one is not a theist, one must be a dogmatic atheist. If one does not think capitalism is perfect, one must believe fervently in socialism. And if one does not have blind faith in X, one must alternatively have blind faith in not X, or the reversal of X. My own opinion, Robert Anton Wilson's, my own opinion is that belief is the death of intelligence, his italics. As soon as one believes a doctrine of any sort, or assumes certitude, one stops thinking about that aspect of existence. The more certitude one assumes, the less there is left to think about, and a person sure of everything would never have any need to think about anything, and might be considered clinically dead under current medical standards. Now, these were the medical standards of the early 80s, and they've probably changed quite a bit by now. Editor's note there. Where the absence of brain activity is taken to mean that life is ended. Belief in the traditional sense, or certitude, or dogma, amounts to the grandiose delusion, my current model or grid or map or reality tunnel contains the whole universe and will never need to be revised. In terms of the history of science and of knowledge in general, this appears absurd and arrogant to me, and I am perpetually astonished that so many people still manage to live with such a medieval attitude.
That's great, man.
Well, he was a heck of a writer,
Oh
and
yeah.
certainly a lot of his thoughts on the nature of belief have impacted me, and have thought about them a lot. And again, like I said, there's parts of his stuff that I'm just like, yeah, you're getting really close to moral relativism in this
Mhm.
regard or that regard, or just relativism in general. But
Yeah.
you know, anyway,
But
so
I wanted to touch on what you
yeah.
said too with the ego. And that's exactly right. Like the ego loves beliefs. It loves because then I mean with beliefs, like you said, you bypass critical thinking. You bypass that whole section of the brain, and it's almost like a lazy way of operating, right? It's because it's based in comfort. It's so easy and comfortable to just believe something, right? And we have these belief systems, and I'll even say this, you know, even in the truth and freedom communities, right? It's more like comfort communities, and you know, across the board with any type of community, they have their own, they have their belief systems. You know, you have the ANCAPs and all this, and it's comfort because they don't, you know, people don't want to look at themselves and have that discomfort of actually, you know, going through their habits. Which, by the way, another word that we can talk about just real quick, I'll throw this in, is spiritual. Spiritual has ritual in the word. Spiral, right? Kind of like it, the top down version of a toroidal. It looks like a spiral. Um, and then ritual. Well, what's ritual? Ritual is, you know, daily practice. So being spiritual is your daily, what you do on a constant basis. And but anyways, I was
And
getting,
I would add
I
really quick,
digress.
I would
Yeah.
add really quick too, because ritual is certainly an important thing. And um, as I study, particularly the alchemical tradition and how it really applies to daily life, because I think uh, in the different occult or mystic traditions that I've come across, I think the one that's been least perverted in a lot of ways is the alchemical, because it started out as so strange and so, I mean, it was kind of self-perverted in the fact, oh, it's just us doing some medieval chemistry, and don't worry about it. It's, you know, gold and lead into gold. That's ridiculous. We could never do that. Meanwhile, here's the real behind the scenes. But one of the things that I always taken away from the concept of applying the alchemy, the transformation, the transmigration, the transformation um, of one state of being or one state of matter into the other, is that it does take, and this is something that's talked about at length in the alchemical traditions, is it does take time, and it does take intentional repetition of certain things. And I think in the modern day, we're so, or at least I am victim, or not victim, I allow myself to be victim, fall victim to routine. And routine is something that's so, you know, you get up, you have breakfast, you do, and it's just a thing you go through day after day. Certainly, you know, work my 9 to 5, certainly, you know, go out on Friday nights, and it's not even like you're going out to celebrate. You're just going out because it's Friday night, and it's the routine. It's the routine and the routine versus the ritual, which is waking up, going, the reason that I'm going to have, you know, a coffee or have a tea or have breakfast is because I know that if I do this at this certain time, it will set me up to be successful later. It will set me up to do good work, to do the great work, hopefully, in my day. And so rather than getting up and going through the daily routine, you're getting up and undertaking your daily ritual. And then, you know, putting that intention into your routine is what makes it ritual. And putting your spirit into it is what your intention is. And that's what makes it ritual. So spiritual, as well as that, you know, toroidal spiral working up and down, and exchanging, it's also part of putting your intention into something and going, yeah, this might be something I do every day, but I'm remembering doing it right now, that this is a ritual that I'm doing intentionally, as opposed to a routine that I'm doing out of habit or out of rote, or where
Exactly.
routine comes from, rote. Uh, so
Conscious
yeah,
actions, right? I mean, like you were saying, you put the intention, you're conscious on the thought forms and the energy that you're putting in your behavior. So, you know, when it's then when you have habit, I mean, it's in your subconscious. So you're not even thinking about it whatsoever. And this is why change is so hard for a lot of people, because it's hardwired so hard. I mean, it's just, they're calcified so hard. To break them out of that cycle, it requires a lot of counter energy. And people are cozy. That's why, slavery is, I mean, we're in like consensual slavery right now. People are choosing to be in slavery, right? This is why, you have to give me good health or universal health care. You have to give me law and order, and protect us from all the quote unquote bad guys. Like, people are making these demands, and, there's no responsibility for your own actions and taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a tacit agreement. We don't say no, so it's a yes, and our actions show otherwise. The majority of people, they act like slaves, unfortunately.
Yeah. And
So,
the consequence bears out. The fruit shows the health of the tree, as it were.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, well said.
I think that's about all I had on that. Yeah. So let's jump on to the next kind of talking point. Yeah, I'll jump into this one here. So you described yourself during your presentation. You described yourself as a prepper propagator, which is a term I found valuable. Hadn't heard quite in that term before. So tell me a little about what that means to you as you answer the question. Why do you have 50 weapons when you only have two hands?
I'm so glad you asked that. That's great. Yeah, so the prepper propagator. Um, the prepper meaning I'm into preparedness. All types of preparedness, for all types of situations. We live in, rough waters in society right now. You never know where it's going to go. But what this really means to me is, I'm talking about life skills. I love to learn real intrinsic value, which means comes from nature. These are life skills that I can learn and grow in, and utilize. For instance, I love gardening. Foraging is a really big one. I also love alchemy, so I make tinctures and salves and all this kind of stuff. So I mean, all these skills that actually have meaning in the real world, and they all apply to, basic survival and the upkeep of the body and the mind. So yeah, I'm a prepper, and then I'm a propagator. So I'm a propagator of objective morality, the knowledge and the information on the causal factors of what's going on in the world, and how we can improve those. So, I'm trying to get the word out about natural law and objective morality and true freedom. And so it's a twofold process that I feel like that's a good balance, and it's important for the preparedness. And this goes hand in hand with self-defense. So why do I have 50 weapons? Um, well, I like swords and axes, but I'm also a huge advocate for the self-defense principle. I'm in California. I do have guns, but I don't go through means of, um, how should I say this? Letting my masters know what I have, right? Which makes it a little more difficult to get certain things, but I'm well equipped, and I also have swords, and there's a spear right behind me, and battle axes and all kinds of stuff. But those are my choice of weapons. My daughter is training right now in archery. So, she's got a couple bows, and that's her choice. She loves, and her and I, we have training swords and stuff, so these are skills, and I teach her how to use a knife properly and a gun properly. These are life skills, because the self-defense principle is, one half of existing. The other half is the non-aggression, meaning you owe everybody one thing, and that's non-aggression. Do no harm. But that's only one half. The second half is, if you are aggressed upon, if someone is trying to cause harm to you, you have the right, the inherent right to protect yourself. And so self-defense is the second half. So it's good to have knowledge of both. But I have 50 and I only have two hands. You're right about that. So 2 minus 50, that's 48. So I'm passing out 48 weapons. If those times come, which are highly probable.
And it's not
So
just being prepared. It's not just having the, resources and skills and understanding, but it's also, being able to propagate that preparation to those around you, which I think is just so valuable. I recently met somebody who I've discovered shortly after meeting him that he was into a lot of issues, and he, one of the first things he said, "Oh, I'm prepared. I'm a prepper. Some people call me a prepper. I'm a prepper." And I
yeah,
immediately thought, excellent. Well, he knows that aspect of it. So now what do I have in this relationship? What can I propagate to him from a knowledge standpoint? Well, I probably didn't think about it in those terms at the time, but what are those other little things that, just from the standpoint of making sure that his understanding, not making sure, because it's up to him to secure that, but giving him, maybe some things, some components, some pieces of the puzzle that, from a philosophical standpoint, make him better capable, if he chooses to take it on board, of preparing in all facets, not just physical, preparing mentally, preparing spiritually, preparing in every way possible, philosophically, etc. So
yeah.
the concept of prepping and propagating.
Oh yeah, and interesting about the guy you were talking about, because I've met people too that they're preppers, but they almost have an imbalance because they're preppers out of fear, right? Like they know, some shit's gonna go down, and they're ready to live in a bunker and stuff like that. I'm about preparation for the love of self-respect, right? And just the knowledge, to have that knowledge and, like you said, propagate it to other people. There's groups where people exchange information. That's real intrinsic value, or is knowledge that you can actually apply to yourself and to the world. So
Well, very important. Preparation is key, and it's not just on the physical level. I think that's important for people to
yeah,
understand.
one thing, I got a buddy, he's like, oh man, he texted me a few days ago. He's like, yo, I just got a new shipment of my freeze dried food, right? He's getting all these rations and shit. And I'm just like, oh, that's cool. He's asking me if I've gotten any. No, I don't. I mean, I might have, a few cans of beans or something, but I've been studying and practicing foraging for several years, that I know there's food everywhere. Nature's abundant. So, um, just wanted to throw that point out
Yeah.
there. Knowledge is important.
Your buddy sounds exactly like my buddy. That's pretty fun.
Yeah.
I got 3 years worth of whatever it is, Highland Farms, the Walmart freeze dried stuff. Okay, good for you. I hope you never need it, but I'm glad that you have it now.
Yeah. What happens when all that runs out? So it's,
Yeah.
it's important to apply the knowledge, right? Because I mean, like, all my weapons, it's like, yeah, it's cool, I have these weapons, but do I know how to use them effectively? Do I know how to take care of them, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. All right, now on to the thing that I'm probably most excited to discuss, saving it for the end, the concept of no leaders, more artists. I'm going to quick read the words from your slide, the slide that you presented, and then we can discuss so that people who have seen it get it reiterated. People who haven't seen your presentation, this is a good taste of what will be in there, and a reason, and hopefully a little teaser as to why you should go watch it right after you're done here. We do not need leaders in this endeavor, for leaders create followers. We need inspiration. By creating art, we can inspire minds to lead themselves out of the darkness of ignorance and into the light of knowledge and action. The internal work of knowing oneself will activate the creative essence, creativity, to become a unique content creator, to influence minds and spark imaginations toward truth, love, and freedom. Empowerment is the one great work and art is the wisdom to know and the skill to do. This was very powerful. So what else you got? What else you want to add to that? What
Hmm.
else deeper thoughts? I this is such a jumping off point,
Yeah.
and something that I've really been kind of coming filling in different kind of pieces of the puzzle of where art fits into all of this. And this was a big puzzle piece. So
Yeah, I'm glad you
jump
appreciate
in.
that. So let's lay some groundwork first, right? So the great work. Now, the great work, and then there's the one great work. As you know, Andy, the great work is, I mean, it's eons old. This is a hermetic phrase and practice, meaning the internal great work of self-development and self-mastery. The one great work, the first time I heard it in that phrase obviously was from Mark Passio, and this would be the external great work, meaning that looking at have an accurate perception of what's going on in the world. And that is the condition of the human condition, which that humanity is enslaved by our own doing, by these false beliefs. And knowing the causal factors. So the one great work is educating the population, the public, on the root of the problem, or the problem, and then the and how to fix that problem, right? We need to take in knowledge of objective morality, natural law, the laws of nature. So it's the great work is twofold: the internal and the external, which the internal always comes first. It's all about your state of mind. You have to integrate that into your being, and then you can radiate it out. So if we're trying to um, influence and wake up the unconscious masses of humanity, right? How do we do that? We can't force them. You can't force anyone to wake up or to do anything, right? It won't work that way. And anyone knows this that have tried to bring, important information to people, and on a physical level, their polyvagus nervous, like, tightens up and constricts, and their kidneys constrict, and they shut you out immediately. It's like the trap door on the conscious mind. They're not going to take in any new knowledge. So what are we doing? Really, we're influencers. So how do we become influencers? And this is where I got, we create art, is because art is based in creativity, which creativity is literally the energy, the life force of creation. And we can use this in an unlimited amount of ways. So applying the great work internally means knowing your sole purpose, what you're good at. If my sole purpose is to do video podcasts or do graphic designs and video editing, make badass, films, that's art that I'm creating, and I can use that art to influence the public. And this can be, like I said, it's limitless. You can do paintings, dancing, all kinds of things. Now, the problem with leaders is, and this goes back to when we were talking about earlier with belief and comfort, it's very easy and comfortable to grab a leader and then follow that leader, because leaders create followers. And those leaders, like, I'll use Mark, for instance, because he's very vocal on he doesn't want to be a guru. He doesn't want to be a leader. So I'll use him as an example. Hope you don't mind, Mark. Um, so, he says this, but if people get attached to him, to his whole style, his whole energy, and what happens when you have leaders is that people tend to mimic them, right? And sure, a lot of my work is very similar to Mark's, talking about the same type of stuff, because this information is eternal and objective in nature, most of it. So, so a leader will lead people down their own path. We need to discover our own soul purpose and walk our own path. And in doing so, we can create art. We can use our talents and our attributes and our qualities to express through creative expression, the message of morality, freedom, the current human condition. This is how we can influence people. This is what art does, you know? So art influences the mind and the heart and the soul on it. I mean, it's so impactful. And that's what we need to do. Instead of forcing information down people's throat, we need to influence them through being the example and creating art. And, you know, you might not reach family members, which family members are the hardest people to reach, right? Because they have a perceived idea of you, right? Like my parents think I'm still little Will, the little badass little kid, you know, so they don't take me seriously. That's because they have their own perceived, you know, mental image of me. But through art, you can influence people and hopefully motivate them to take in the information, the message of your art, and then apply that to themselves and do the same thing, express it through their own creativity. So, you know, we're trying to create teachers of this. Now, one thing for leaders, now a leader is different from a mentor. A mentor is a stepping stone of evolutionary consciousness, meaning I have many mentors. Brian Easterday is a huge mentor of mine for Vedic astrology, right? Same with, you know, Michael William Denny, the Thunder Wizard. These are my mentors as I'm in the study of the science of Vedic astrology. And I will gain all kinds of knowledge and information from them, and they will help elevate my consciousness, my conscious awareness in Vedic astrology in that category, and until I don't need them no more, and I move to another teacher or mentor. You know, this is mentors are good. Leaders tend to captivate you, and it's not the leader's fault, they're just being them, but it's mainly the individual that says, oh yes, I like that information, or I like that person, he's my leader, and then they tend to kind of throw away their own personal development and just mimic the leader and, you know, follow down that path, the other person's path. So that's pretty much the gist of it. And yeah, inspiration, right? Inspiration, when you're inspiring someone, inspiration means to breathe in. This is how they're going to take in the message, the information, versus forcing people. And this is what we need. We need more artists. We need more people that know themselves to a certain extent, meaning they know what they're good at, what they like to do, and then use that creative expression with the message of ending human slavery, objective morality, and natural law.
And just the inspiration breathing together takes me back to spirit ritual. Spire is to breathe. Spiritual is just the breath ritual or breathing ritual. Anyway, yes, that's a really good and important distinction to make between mentors and leaders. And, you know, I I appreciate that you bring up the idea that it's not necessarily, you know, I think there's some kind of bad actor type leaders who are out there just trying to get as many followers as they can for their own egoic gains or, you know, sense of self or whatever. But a lot of times, you know, there are leaders that, and I think Mark is a good example again, leaders that set out and say, do not follow me. I am not a leader. I am just here to give information. And people, for whatever reason, make the decision, or whether consciously or not, to make that person their leader, their guru, even if that person's sitting there, like Zen Cohen might do, saying, who's your leader? Oh, you are, master. And then the master hits the guy with a rock and says, who's your leader?
Exactly.
Like you, because you hit me with a rock, and that was not nice. But that's a very important distinction that you make between mentors and leaders, and between even the people that, you know, say somebody, I can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but somebody that's out there saying, follow me, follow me, follow me. Well, you can still learn from that person. It's no reason to totally shut out their information. You can still learn from that person and say, except I'm not going to follow you. You're not going to be my leader. I'll take what I can information wise from you and maybe learn, apophatically, learn nephetically, learn from, oh, I want to be doing not what that person is doing. That's not a good way. But if I observe them, I learn that, hey, doing it that way is probably a bad idea. And I'm not going to take that in. But ultimately, all of that goes to kind of where I've been for the last couple of years with defining and putting art into the context of the whole conversation about freedom and natural law, and particularly the teaching, and why what you brought up about um, empowerment and inspiring being the real kind of heart of the great work, or the one great work, the external great work, uh, goes right to the heart of it. And like I said, fills a big kind of piece of the puzzle, because for me, and part of it was the need to redefine or start talking about art in such a way that we kind of got rid of some of those definitions that people have attached to art. And oh, is the Mona Lisa art, or is this NFT art, or is this movie art, or is this, I've been in the culinary industry for a long time, and I've had a really uncomfortable kind of relationship with people going, oh, so you're like an artist. Well, I cook food for a living. I don't know that that makes me an artist, because just because the Food Network is saying that all these people are artists because that doesn't mean everybody, it's like saying, oh, you're a sign painter or you're in advertising, therefore you're an artist. Well, okay, I create visual imagery, but is it art? Yeah, anyway, so I wanted to start framing that discussion differently. And so what I started to come around to is the idea of that art is essentially a way of, even for a brief moment, allowing the observer, allowing or creating something that in one moment someone else observes, and in that moment they see the world in a new way. They look at the world through a new perspective, and they have that inspiration, they have that flash of, hey, the world can look different. Just because I have this view of reality, this belief structure, here's somebody else showing me the same landscape, but with a different eye. If it's a painting, or telling a story of this guy goes and does this, but he's telling it in such a way, the story's being told in such a way, there's characters or there's consequence happening, decisions made, whatever, that makes me think, well, if I was that character in the story, how would I behave? Would I behave the way that that character behaves? And if so, what would I get? Let's take a look at what the story says. What is the consequence of his action? And then you go, oh my gosh, I can see that this writer of this story, this creator of this narrative, is trying to show me either, hey, this might be a good way to go about looking at life, or hey, this, caution, this is a dangerous way about to go about looking at life. And it's that inspiration that makes maybe you shift your perspective, you shift out of your belief structure, your little reality tunnel, and see the world through somebody's reality tunnel just for a moment. And that transformational moment is art. And it's not the book, it's not the painting, it's the moment that that individual has in their mind, seeing that thing in another way. It's that flash moment of inspiration. And you take it, to its logical, most outlandish kind of example, which is there was a French writer who used the pen name Stendhal, and he wrote in the early part of the 1800s. I think he lived till 1860 or something. Anyway, but he, where was it? He was in Italy somewhere, maybe Florence, and he goes into some cathedral or museum and he sees a work of art. No, it was a tomb. He went to see the tombs of some saints, and he walks in, and supposedly he gets so overwhelmed he couldn't move, and just had this, it was just so beautiful, and he just saw the beauty of the world. And so this whole idea of being paralyzed by art is called Stendhal syndrome after him. And that's essentially like kind of a big over the top version, but to me, that's art, is that moment when you're watching a movie, when you're looking at a painting, when you're reading a book, where you have that, just that feeling of, I'm seeing this thing, maybe mundane, maybe novel, but I'm seeing it in a different way than I would have otherwise seen it. And that can snap people out of that belief structure of, a flower is a flower is a flower, to say, oh no, to this person, through this perspective, this person's way of looking at the world, the flower actually represents this deep beauty or this connection that one person has to another, or flower represents loss and suffering, or this flower represents whatever it is. And now your belief structure and belief attachment to this concept that you hadn't really thought about snaps in such a way that you can now think about it and now put it into a term that's not just a passive belief, but now you're actively going, why do they see it that way? And it leads to all, anyway.
Yeah.
So to think about that in terms of now, what are we creating? And, instead of, for me, so art is this big nebulous thing. No, let's call art that moment of experience. So what are you looking at? Well, you can't be looking at a work of art because we're using that term somewhere else. So what you're looking at is an artifact. So when you're interacting with the artifact and having that moment of art, if the artificer, the one creating the artifact, is creating it in such a way as to inspire a look into, hey, government is slavery, now all of a sudden you're doing the one great work through art. You're doing the one great work intentionally trying to get people to snap into that realization that, hey, this is immoral. Hey, you can look at government in a way you've never seen it before as an immoral, illegitimate institution. Anyway. But so that was a really big, for me, hearing that and hearing the way that you framed it in terms of, that was a real a flashover moment for me to go from seeing kind of what people think of traditionally as art in terms of artifact, the artistic experience is the moment of art, and the artificer being the person who's creating the thing that happens to be observed, to say, okay, here's where the great work fits in. That was a moment of art for me. So the artifact that you put out that was that presentation resonated to me as art, and particularly that part of it. I just talking about, and it's so interesting, the recursivity to me. You're talking about art was what was my moment of artistic experience with that artifact. So
dude, that's awesome, man. That makes the world, I mean, this is what the great work's about. And now we're having a conversation here that we're going to put out to the world so the world can see. So there's a ripple effect. And I love the connection which you made, that moment, that aha moment that, all quote unquote truthers have experienced, that light bulb, that, that feeling of the, the neural pathways, or the new neural pathways, or the connecting ones, right? It's just that spark, and art hits you right in the heart, right? Because with heart, art is in heart, and also art is in earth. So nature, the creativity and the art of nature, we see this, in sacred geometry and all this kind of stuff. So this is an inherent in the natural world, and we have the same capability of doing that. So that's my call to action. And everything you said just there, I mean, that just added right on top of it and made it even better. I loved what you said. But that's my call to action, is to have a different perspective with the great work. Anybody, we all can, do videos where we're, they're fucking killing us out there, and, the order followers and all this stuff. Like we can rant and do all that. And I'm not talking about Mark. Mark's got phenomenal work. His creative expression is continuing, and it's there. It's going to be imprinted eternally. I'm just talking about, we need to step into our creativity, and then we can expand and use our creative expression to have all kinds of ideas. And when you do that, that's how you can influence the best with people.
yeah, it's almost that moment of, oh my gosh, here's a big problem in the world. Here's a big problem in the world. And your reaction is just to stand on the street corner and say, here's a big problem in the world. Instead of seeing that for what it is, which is an opportunity for a better solution, a more creative way to solve that problem. And, unfortunately for many people that were born around the time that I was born in the early 80s, and certainly I think people that were born 10 or so years after me that came of age in the post No Child Left Behind education nightmare. The imagination has been so stunted and bred out of people, not genetically, but choked out of people, conditioned out of people is a better way to say it. Yeah. And so when you see that, oh, this is a big problem, oh, Russia's a big problem, oh, the supply chain's a big problem, do you see it as just a big problem and you got to be the first person to identify the problem and just say, oh, look at me, I've identified the problem? Or do you go, okay, so what's the creative solution? How do I imagine this? Okay, the supply chain might be an issue. How do I imagine what my world's going to be like? Well, maybe I need to learn about foraging. Maybe I need to learn about growing my own food. Maybe I need to learn about, and even if, well, I'll buy all this, freeze dried stuff. Well, I have to imagine what happens when you're confronted with the situation, the problem, the potential solution of when that starts to dwindle or run out. Well, there you go back to that original. Imagine a world where I'm growing my own food. Imagine if I could figure out how to forage for and so some of these issues, some of these problems aren't problems. There are problems from one perspective, but they're really an opportunity to use that creativity to say, okay, yeah, Russia's a big problem or whatever. I'm not saying Russia's a big problem, but government is a big problem. Now I can just stand out there and say government's a big problem, government's a big problem, which, it's important for people to understand. But again, getting to that heart, how can I insert that thought into somebody's mind in such a way that they're experiencing not just me yelling it at them, but they're experiencing what it is like for me to have that thought, to have had that experience. So, what are the opportunities we have to think of creative and imaginative ways to introduce people to ideas in such a way that it's not going to make that parasympathetic neural reaction of closing up and closing down. And that's, oh my gosh, sounds really hard. No, that sounds like an awesome problem to have, because that's going to demand a very interesting and creative solution. And one of the things that I talk about with a good friend of mine is let's stop talking about, well, we got to collaborate for a solution, or it's the most competitive person. No, let's get rid of all that. We got a solution, or we got a problem. Everybody's looking for a solution. Whoever's got the best solution is gonna succeed. But then another better solution might come across, and sometimes I might be working with you on a solution. Sometimes I might be working with that person. So we're not competing or collaborating. It's a collaboration to see who has the best solution, and we're constantly collaborating, constantly competing. So it's this collaboration, and art is very much that way. And that, you might collaborate on a work of art that says one thing, that brings an idea out, and it's the result of that process between those two minds and introducing something into the world. And then you can do it with somebody else and have a totally different way of going about it. And one might be the right solution, the right way of looking at it for one audience, and one for another audience. So there's no wrong way of going about it. The only wrong way is to say, oh, there's a big problem, there's a big problem. Well, what's the solution? My solution is to just say there's a big problem. Okay, yes, but then what's next? So
Exactly. Yeah, no, for sure, man. My partner with John Rowland for Natural Freedom League, we talk all the time, man, and we're just constantly in this back and forth of creativity, just thinking of new creative ideas. That's the state of mind people need to get. They need to get in that creative state of mind. The social engineers, they're not pretty creative. They're manipulative, and I mean, they love their coercion and duress, but they don't really step into that higher level of consciousness of creativity. And so that's my call to action, and mainly with the message of objective morality, natural law, and ending human slavery. That's the one great work, and doing it from a creative, artistic point of view is where I think people need to think about.
absolutely. Well, this has been incredible. I thank you so much for your time. I think that's probably a nice, clean place to end it, if you ask me. And I just thank you so much. This has been a phenomenal experience for me.
Always, Andy. Thanks, man. I really appreciate you, dude. Anytime you
Uh,
want to come back on, I'm always welcome.
Sounds great. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, brother. Have a good one.
You too.